Good. All right, open up to lesson number 24. Lesson 24. So we have talked about Jesus' early, middle, and late ministries. And now this is really very appropriate for the time. We're just a week and a day after Easter. And so we have Jesus' Passion. Now, can anybody tell me why you think that this week of Jesus, the week prior to Easter, it would be referred to as Jesus' Passion? Any ideas? Shiloh?
What he's meant to do.
What he's meant to do. So why call it passion?
A goal.
A goal. All right. So passion seems to have a deeper significant meaning. If you have a real passion for, let's say, riding your bike, right? It probably means you do it a lot, right? And you care a lot about the kind of bike that you have and where you go and what you do on it. If you have a passion for bike riding and it sits in your garage for years at a time and never gets out, it's probably not a passion. So a passion is something you feel very deeply about, very powerfully. All right? Good. So as we talk about Jesus and his passion, I think I like what Shiloh said, is it's the purpose, right? This idea that they feel strongly about this to be able to accomplish the job of, saving the world, okay? So as we think about this, passion is strong emotions. Jesus certainly demonstrated strong emotions in the passion, but we're also going to see that there's some, they go downhill, uphill, and so forth. And so I think Jesus' passion that week before Easter, there was a lot of highs and lows, and they changed pretty rapidly. And so we're going to kind of look at that a little bit tonight and actually look at what the book is going to do for us tonight. Is it's going to show you a map of Jerusalem, a little bit outside of Jerusalem, and kind of say what happened on these events. Where did it take place? So you kind of get this idea of how instrumental that Jerusalem was. So, volunteer to read the brown box there called the big picture. Ada?
What happens in the last week before Jesus' crucifixion? On the Sunday before, the day when God's people would select the Passover lamb, Jesus enters Jerusalem for the last time.
Why don't you underline that? Jesus enters Jerusalem. Right? All right, Ada, keep going.
On the way, crowds of people sing, shout, and wave palm branches, hailing Jesus as the most powerful King and Messiah who will reestablish the greatness of God's people once more. Jesus' kingdom, however, will come about in a different way than expected. He teaches for a week, all the while the religious leaders hatch a plot to ambush him and sentence him to death. The night before he's crucified, Jesus celebrates the Passover meal.
Stop right there. Underline that for me. Jesus celebrates the Passover meal. Right? That's what happens on Maundy, Thursday. All right? Okay, keep going.
Jesus celebrates the Passover meal with his disciples, revealing that the meal was always meant to point to him and what he would do. He says that the bread and wine are his true body and blood and institutes the sacrament of the altar for all believers. After this, he takes his disciples out to pray, and while he prays to the Father, he is betrayed by the disciple Jesus, arrested, and taken to the high priest's house. After a hasty trial...
Stop there. Hasty trial. Underline that. That's Good Friday. Hasty trial.
After a hasty trial by the religious leaders, he is accused of the high crime of blasphemy. Jesus is then sent to the Roman governor Pilate, who finds no reason to execute Jesus. After a hasty trip to King Herod, Jesus is sent back to Pilate, who, under the pressure of the religious leaders, sentences Jesus to death, even though Pilate knows Jesus is an innocent man. Jesus is about to die for the sins of the world. Okay, so we're going to get to the Good Friday death and then the Easter resurrection next week. But so as we see this, there's a lot going on. So we've got the Sunday before Easter, right? The week before we celebrated on Sunday is Palm Sunday. Now, we call it Palm Sunday because people waved palms. That was kind of unique. It wasn't a normal happenstance there in Jerusalem to do that. It's very unusual. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight.
And then actually a fair amount takes place between Palm Sunday and Thursday. Jesus is there in Jerusalem. This is one of the times, there's actually two times. This is one of the times he clears the temple, right? Which means he chases out everybody who's in the temple selling animals. That's where he washes their feet, right? If you know that story where Jesus washes his disciples' feet, that happens in the upper room. He also begins, instructs them on what the Last Supper, the final supper, communion, right, what we call it, takes place and how that's going to now change as we go. Then he's captured that night. He's beaten and killed on Friday, laid in a tomb, and then 2 days later, we'd say 2 days later, the Jews see it as 3 days later, right, the way that they count days. If he dies on a Friday, he's in the tomb on Saturday, he rises on Sunday, right? You and I kind of look at it as, well, it's already kind of into Friday, so a day from now is Saturday, and a day from then is Sunday. So we'd say, oh, he's only in the tomb 2 days, all right? It's not worth arguing about. It's the way the Jews kind of count time and the way we do. Doesn't change your salvation, as I often think of these things. All right, turn to page 98. All right, top of the page. Passion Week. It says the last week of Jesus' life, which Christians around the world remember as Passion Week, is really important to understand the narrative of salvation. In it, we start to see how Jesus fulfills all of God's promises from the Old Testament, and also how he sets up our lives as New Testament people today. When it says fulfills all of God's promises, some of you guys on that quiz that some of you took, you kind of got that one a little turned around as far as how many prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. Some of you were really short on that. There's actually around 300 prophecies out of the Old Testament that Jesus fulfills. And this is talking about most of them. Can anybody think of a prophecy about Jesus that has not been fulfilled? There's something that is yet to happen that he couldn't fulfill it yet. Judge, right? Judgment Day, the end of the world, Judgment Day, and so forth. There are prophecies about Jesus coming back as judge. He didn't fulfill that prophecy because it hasn't happened yet, right? Now, if you and I, if we were growing up in Old Testament times, we would say that most all of the prophecies hadn't been fulfilled yet. They're not fulfilled until Jesus of Nazareth shows up on the scene and suffers and dies and rises again. That's most all the prophecies. So like Moses, Elijah, Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, all those guys, many of them had these prophecies, but they didn't come true because they're still waiting for the Messiah. We are very, very blessed to live on what we would say this side of the resurrection, right? Because we actually have the evidence of the resurrection instead of the Old Testament. If you go home tonight and your folks say, we're going to go to Disney World, right? Maybe that's something cool to you. It doesn't matter. It's just an example, right? It would be like, well, I'm really excited to go to Disney World because it's coming, right? I'm trusting my parents to say we're going to go and we are going to go, so I'm excited about it. You can imagine how differently you'll feel, or at least how you'll see it, after you go to Disney World. Because we went to Disney World. We did these things at Disney World. I felt this way about it. It'd be more concrete because you're like, I'm on the other side of Disney World. We went, right? Got to experience it kind of firsthand. All right. For this lesson, we're going to track the events of the last week of Jesus' life before his crucifixion. I'm going to use a map. The map is actually on page 99, right? So if you guys see that kind of green and tan map, about a quarter of a page over there on that side, we're going to look at that map. Now, if you look really closely at that map, the brown area, right, is basically Jerusalem, okay? The green area around it is the area around it, the ground. And there's several numbers that you're going to see outside the town and inside the town. Everybody kind of see it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think. Yeah. And so you've got a couple of little rivers in there and pools and the temple and Herod's palace and all those things. So we kind of get a picture of what's happening here. Now, what I'd like to do, even though it's going to throw us around a lot, is I want to take these in order. right? I actually want to take these in order 1 through 6. So even though on your page where we're starting, it starts with number 2, I want you to jump to the other side, look at number 1. Okay? So we're on page 99. Everybody with me? Right? Number 1. Now I know it's not that complicated. Okay? But take a look at number 1. This is where Jesus enters Jerusalem. This is Palm Sunday. Okay? So make sure you guys are all there with me. I want you to open up a Bible, Gospel of Luke. Right? Luke chapter 19. Luke 19. And we're going to begin at verse 28. In your Bible, what is it entitled? Jace, what do you got? Triumphal Entry. Triumph, right? Triumph is victory. It's a celebration. It's a big deal, right? A very, very big deal. So let's take a look at that. Would somebody...
Going up to Jerusalem. When he drew near to Bethlehem and Bethany, at the mount that is called Olivet, he sent 2 of the disciples, saying, "Go into the village in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever yet sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say this, 'The Lord has need of it.'" So those who were sent away and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. As he was drawing near, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out."
Very good. That was actually what I preached on Palm Sunday, that actual passage. We talked about in Lent, we were talking about stones. Everything about it had this theme of stones. And so that last line, if they're quiet, even the stones will cry out. Right? God's creation proclaims that he is king. And so I want you to imagine for a second what this scene must have looked like. All right? It's describing that they take their cloaks off. Now, I don't know how you guys feel about your coats, right? I know some of you wore some tonight. Maybe you did because it's nice enough. But I want you to imagine you probably care about your coat, right? I don't know that there's too many of us that would take our coats off, put them out on the ground so that somebody on a donkey could walk over them, right? Because first of all, the cloaks aren't necessary. Right? It's not necessary for the donkey to carry Jesus to walk on cloaks. Would have been just fine walking on the road. What they were doing was creating a pathway that was special. Okay? Have you guys ever been to a wedding or maybe seen a wedding where they have a flower girl that throws petals, right, on the walk up? Some of you might even been a flower girl. If some of you ladies were ever in a wedding. Were you, Landry? Yeah, so my daughter was when she was little. But that's the whole point. It's not like the bride couldn't get to the front of the church without flower petals. It just makes the way special, right? So they take their coats off, their cloak, it's like a robe, and lay those out. So they're getting dirty and stepped on and so forth. But they wanted to honor this Jesus. And so this was the way they were going to do it. Others go and grab palms, right? Those great big leaves of those kind of Middle Eastern plants and so forth, to take them and wave them kind of like the closest analogy I could probably make is like pom-poms, right? Because they wanted something that was big and flashy and got a lot of attention. And so they got these palms and they're waving them and so forth. I want you to understand this is not a common activity in Jerusalem, right? For one, who's in charge? Who's in charge of Jerusalem? The Romans are, okay? So if the Romans are in charge, they probably don't want the Jews getting out of control and getting, all boisterous and loud and excited and so forth, because that means there could be problems, right? And there were, one of Jesus, I think we highlighted this I think I highlighted it in the quiz. If not, it was one of the names listed. Do you guys remember what a zealot is? Do you guys remember what a zealot was? In your workbooks, go back to, for you guys watching at home, do this too.
87.
Hey, there you go. Nice job. 87, page 87, the bottom right. There's a word at the very bottom. There's Pharisees, Sadducees, and Zealots, right? Zealots. They're more political than religious. They despise the Roman rule. One of Jesus' disciples was Simon the Zealot. And so if I could be blunt, and I'm going to be blunt here, a zealot wanted Rome out, right? And they would actually do what they could to discourage and break up Roman rule and things like that. In fact, they would live by this particular mantra. The only good Roman is a dead Roman, right? And so many times the zealots were carrying knives on them, right? They were kind of like, terrorist is not a good word, but it's close. They were like Jewish terrorists against the Romans, right? They're like, Romans were in control. It's like if another country captured us, okay? Like, we'll say Germany, right? We'll go back to like World War II. Let's say Germany invades and takes over America. Well, you'd want to push back against the enemy, right? You'd want to create difficulty for them. You'd want to fight back and so forth. But if you were relatively subdued, like the Jews were by the Romans, there would be a few of these little outbreaks of people that would like, I'm going to try to kill a Roman, kill a soldier, kill a political officer, whatever the case may be. So I tell you that because, see, while there's this uprising about this Jesus riding into town, right, then the Romans would have kind of gone, hey, listen, quiet down, right? You're getting out of control, and this could create a riot or some chaos for us, and we don't want that. We want to keep everybody under control. So, jot that down, guys. In a few words underneath that, the reading of Luke 19, it just says, describe a little bit what that scene would look like. It'd be festive. It'd be celebratory, right? The root word of that, obviously, is celebrate. It would be unusual, right? Maybe jot that word down because they don't have parades. That was an unusual thing. They also don't worship God outside the temple, okay? And that was a point that I made on Palm Sunday in the sermon, was that as people are singing Hosanna and things like that, this would have been really out of character, okay? I don't know if you guys have ever been to an event or something as middle schoolers that you had a church service outside, or you were together in some group and so forth, and maybe there was prayer or some singing, whatever. Something that might look a little bit like church, but it was outside of this building, right? And you'd kind of go, oh, that's different, right? It's outside the norm. That's really what Palm Sunday probably would have symbolized. All right, so now on the map, I want you to find number 1, and I want you to circle it. Right, on the map, find number 1, and it's right next to what words? Mount of Olives, or the Golden Gate right there, right? So you see that line, how it zigzags as it goes up there? That's to indicate that it's going uphill, right? Jerusalem actually set up on a high area, which is one of the reasons it was the capital city of the Promised Land. It was easier to defend, right? Hard to defend if you're out on a flat area where your enemies can come from every direction, right? This one was decent because it had 2 rivers, right? Going up the east side and across the south. A little tougher to cross a river with an army. But it's also uphill. And so that means all you have to do is be able to point arrows and things down. And that way you could defend it a little bit better. If you guys ever played King of the Hill, right? It's not a very complicated game, right? You get on top of a sand hill, a snow hill, whatever. And you stand on the top. And people try to come up there and topple you, and then they stand on the top and so forth. And it's not hard to keep people off the top if it's small enough. Well, that's kind of the way Jerusalem was. It was a small enough city on top of a big cliff, a bluff, and that's how they would defend it. All right, let's switch back to page 98 and look at the Lord's Supper. All right, that's taking place on Thursday night. And you guys find number 2 on the map. and circle that for me. You should find the words upper room next to it. Right? Upper room. In your Bibles, go to Luke 22. We were in Luke 19, so just go forward a couple of chapters. Luke 22, we're going to look at just verses 1, 2, and 3. Do I have another volunteer? Please, Anna Jo.
Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people.
Yep, one more.
Satan entered into Judas, called
Iscariot,
who was of the number of the 12.
There you go. That's all we need to do is really kind of get that ID down there. So before we jump into what's in your workbook, help me out. What's the Passover? Landry?
It's a celebration when the dark angel passed through to kill all the firstborn sons of all the Jewish people.
And where was this happening the first time? Egypt, right? So just to give you guys some clarity, this is the great thing. We forget this. Passover actually tells you what happened. The angel of death passed over. Okay? And so the details were Moses goes to Pharaoh, let my people go. God says, right, to let my people go. And Pharaoh goes, I'm not going to do it. And he says, so here's the first plague. Here's the second plague, third plague, fourth plague. And each time it's pretty bad. Water turns to blood. There's gnats, there's frogs, there's locusts, there's fire from heaven. I mean, there's 9 really terrible plagues, but not enough to kind of break the resolve of Pharaoh. He's like, yeah, this is inconvenient, but I'm not letting these people go. See, you have to understand, and I don't mean to defend Pharaoh in this, because I'm not, but there were 2 million Hebrews in Egypt, okay? Now, I love connecting the dots because it helps us think. How did the Jews, or the Hebrews, they're the same people, how did the Hebrews end up in Egypt? They didn't start out as 2 million people. Right? You remember, Jace?
They're like forced to spread.
You're close. You're close. It has to do with where they are. Landry?
Joseph was taken to Egypt and then he brought his whole family over.
There you go. So if we go all the way back, so the Hebrews were actually there initially voluntarily, right? They didn't get dragged in. Now, you guys, if you guys remember this, we talked about how the north kingdom, the southern kingdom, right? Assyria came in, took the northern kingdom, hauled them off, made them slaves and so forth. Then Babylon comes in, takes the southern kingdom. Did I get that right? Assyrians took the northern kingdom. Babylonians took the southern kingdom, hauled them off. And that was Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Lion's Den and so forth, all of that. The Hebrews being in Egypt were there voluntarily. See, Joseph, when his brothers hated him because he had all these dreams and was dad's favorite, they sold him into slavery. He ended up in Egypt. And then through God's hand and God's providence, he ascended to this place of great power. He was the right-hand man to Pharaoh. And so then when the famine hits, right, 7 good years, 7 bad years, during those 7 bad years, everybody's starving except the people in Egypt. Right? Because Joseph God had gifted him with the knowledge and the wisdom to say, so we're going to store a lot of our food for the good 7 years, so for the bad 7 years, we'll have enough. Well, naturally, the Hebrews from the promised land kind of go, man, we're starving. We need to go someplace and find food and so forth. And so they show up. Joseph recognizes them. There's all that drama between you don't know who I am and I'm trying to, get you here and dad here and so forth. When he finally reveals that, he says now they can settle in the best possible places. So in some of the Nile River deltas where they settle, it's great fertile land to, have herds and crops and things like that. So they were there, but again, the Hebrews, they worship Yahweh. Right? Does anybody know what Egypt worships most of the time? Many gods, right? There's the sun god. There's the god of death. There's, fertility gods. If you guys remember, we talked about Baal and Asherah. Those were some of the Old Testament ones. It's all along those lines, right? And so if you guys know anything about Eastern religions in Egypt and things like that, the god Set, or things like that. A lot of times they look like jackal heads, but human bodies and so forth. Those were some of the Egyptian gods. My point of bringing that up is, here's where the separation happened. You had these Hebrews living in Egypt, but they worship Yahweh, right? And then they're surrounded by Egyptians that worship the sun, the moon, the stars, the ground, whatever. So there's just naturally this separation, okay? It's like if you had a really, really good friend and they started liking a really different kind of music and you hated it, right? I remember when my son Noah, he's in college now, he started dating a girl when he was going to Calvary high school, and she really liked country music. Now, I don't have any problem with country music. I actually like about all kinds of music. But it kind of shocked me that my son Noah started listening to all this country music all of a sudden, right? Now, what if you hated country music, right? You're like, I like classical rock, I like rap music, I like violins, I don't know. But country music is pretty different. You can understand that if somebody's around you all the time kind of going, I want to listen to country music, you're like, I don't like country music. There's going to be a division, right? Just because of music. Here, religiously, that's what happens. So, anyhow, the point is that there is this desire for them to engage, right, in the country, but the God worship is really the hindrance. And so, God sends the 10th plague, the angel of death, and everyone who doesn't have what on their house is killed, right? What do they have to have on their house? Landry? Blood of a lamb. Now, this is really, really important, right? Because as it said here, we just talked about this, is that all of this, especially the Lord's Supper and the supper, the Passover, all of that is always pointing forward. Okay? So when you and I participate in the Lord's Supper, and you guys will soon, when we participate in that, it is an opportunity for us to be able to say, this is what Jesus did, right? For them, it was more of Jesus kind of going, here's how I want you to do the Passover now. Do you think it would be wrong for us to celebrate the Passover as Christians? Would it be wrong to remember back to how God rescued the Hebrews? No, not at all. In fact, if you've ever heard of a Seder meal, right, it's called a Seder meal. Some people still practice those. And there's actually food and herbs and certain ceremonial kind of things that reminded them, and they've been doing this for really several thousand years, the Jews, that reminded them of the kind of food that by the way, we do this today when we eat the bread, right, that we use, we call it the host, that represents, well, it doesn't represent, but it is Christ's body as well as bread. And it's unleavened and not leavened. If you know what leavened bread is, leavened bread rises. That's because it's got yeast inside. And so when you cut into it, it's light and airy and so forth. Unleavened bread doesn't rise. It's flat, very dense. Now, the reason they use unleavened bread is because it symbolizes the fact that the Hebrews didn't have any time to bake bread for it to rise. When the angel of death came by and passed over, and it's like, it's time for you all to get out of Egypt. There was no time, right? So you just pack up what you had, and so the bread symbolized something you'd make in a hurry. Right? And so that's the reason. There's nothing special about that, you know, the nutrients of it or that. It's symbolic. In fact, most things about the Passover feast are symbolic. When Jesus steps in, he makes it totally different. He says, now it's not symbolic. Now it's me. And we'll talk a little bit about that here. So, by Thursday, I'm reading in that brown box. Follow along. By Thursday, a lot had happened. Jesus had cleared the temple. Why don't you underline that? Jesus had cleared the temple of money changers, spent a lot of time teaching. But by Thursday evening, Jesus had gone back to the upper room and was going to celebrate the Passover feast with his disciples. Now, again, I think I shared this with you guys last week. Jesus' public ministry, which means once he was out leading and teaching and so forth, was about 3.5 years long. His public ministry. Not because they give us dates in the Bible, because they don't, right? What it does tell us is there were 3 Passovers that he celebrated with his disciples. And since a Passover is every year, if you celebrate 3 Passovers, it's at least 3 years, right? And then some change based on when other festivals came around as well, right? And we already read that, thanks to Anna Joe. How is Satan at work here to bring about the death of Jesus? Guys, how did Satan help or aid in bringing about the death of Jesus? What did Satan do? Thoughts, Anna Jo?
Tempted Judas.
Tempted Judas. Write that down, right? Tempted Judas, or we could say entered into Judas. That's what verse 3 says. I don't know that I would go as far as talking about possession, right? Because, we talk about Jesus healed people that were cured of demon possession. That's when you are absolutely under the influence. But Judas was influenced by Satan. I don't think he was running around foaming at the mouth. There was that one guy that was naked running around in the cemetery that Jesus saved and so forth. Obviously, that's not what Judas was doing. But there are things that hamper your ability to reason and think, and many times that's Satan. All right? Satan and demons and things like that. We won't get too deep into that right now. Adam and Eve. Now, I want you to understand something when it comes to Satan, because Hollywood isn't all that accurate whenever they talk about Satan. Now, Hollywood's job is not to teach you theology, right? Hollywood's job for there is to make money. And so they'll sell whatever they sell, okay? A lot of it not all that good. But they give Satan in Hollywood a lot more power than he actually has, okay? So just as a side note to this, Satan can't just jump into a person, okay? Satan really needs to be invited in, all right? It's really similar, guys, and I'm trying to make these equal. It's actually similar to what Jesus offers. He invites us to have him come into us. He doesn't jump into people either to kind of fill your heart and whatnot. Otherwise, you'd just be saved or condemned by chance, right? And that's not what it is. So here's what it boils down to, and I don't mean to. This is going to be a little deep for tonight. If a person ends up after their death, ending up in hell, right? It is 100% because of them, right? If you end up as a person, end up suffering in hell for the rest of eternity, it is your fault. You have rejected the only solution, that's Jesus, and you have allowed, right, that to happen. Okay? God doesn't just simply start pointing at people and go, you're going to heaven, not you, you're going to heaven, so forth. It's not what God does, right? Jesus came, says in the Gospel of John, he came to save all people. Everyone, this is true. Everyone's sins are forgiven. The difference is most of them don't know by who, right? Because when you come to know Jesus, it's not like your sins have to be forgiven at that point. They are. Jesus has died and rose again for the forgiveness of all sin. All of it. Past, present, future, everything. Okay? The difference is whether or not you accept that invitation. Okay? Now, so, person ends up in hell because of you. Person ends up in heaven because of Jesus. So there's the kind of interesting twist. See, people don't go to hell because of Jesus. Because he somehow said, I condemn you, I judge you, and so forth. If you end up in hell, it is because you have rejected the only solution. That's God. Right? If you end up in heaven, you end up in heaven because of God, God's grace. It's a gift. Okay? All right. Luke 22, we're there still. Would somebody start reading verse 7 for me, please? How about one of my guys over here? Somebody start on verse 7. Somebody, please.
22 verse 7.
Yep. Start on it, Bodie. Should be because then came the day of unleavened bread.
Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus went and sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it. They said to him, Where will you have us prepare it? He said to them, Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters, and tell the master of the house, the teacher says to you, Where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished. Prepare it there. And they went and found it just as he had told them. And they prepared the Passover.
Okay, good. So we've got this Passover. This is a habit of Jesus and his disciples. They get together. Guys, it's not way off from the way we get together for Thanksgiving. Right? When you have a Thanksgiving meal, that's kind of a tradition. We're like, oh, we get family together. We often eat a turkey, certain kinds of food. There's certain traditions. Now, there's not a lot of religious significance to the food we eat. That's kind of cultural. It's not like Thanksgiving is celebrated all around the world. In fact, Thanksgiving is really pretty much just an American thing. Right? Because we're thankful for the times when we came to this country and kind of unity and goodwill to the new settlers and Indians and the indigenous people, things like that. And there's this kind of moment that we kind of enjoy that time. But it's symbolic in the way that we go. So this food is symbolic. In the Passover, it's even more so. So what they would do is they would sacrifice a lamb, eat the lamb, right? Because it's a food source. It was actually a normal food source. But again, it's to recognize that a lamb had to die in order to give up its blood. As Landry said, you put blood along the top of the door and down the sides, and that way the angel of death passed over. Now, it's interesting when Jesus then calls his disciples to come together on this particular night, something changes, right? Now, instead of just going, we're going to participate and eat a lamb, and we're going to eat the bitter herbs, and we're going to drink wine, and we're going to say these things that all remind us of the Passover, now he says there's something different that I'm going to begin tonight. And it's the Lord's Supper, communion, okay? Somebody pick up verse 14. Jace, how about you? Would you please?
And when the hour came, he reclined at table, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I earnestly desire to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, take this and let it alone with yourself. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And likewise the cup after he had eaten, saying, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to question one another, which of them they would be who was going to do this.
All right, so he begins the Lord's Supper. You guys have heard some words similar to this, right? On the night when Jesus was betrayed, he took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take, eat. This is my body, which is given for you. Those are the words that I say every single Sunday prior to distributing the host and the wine to some of you and your parents and things like that. And so what we see is that he's instituting this, but something has changed. In your books there, it says, refresh your understanding. This is that second little line of the important meal by flipping back to lesson 9. We don't have to do that right now. So how did Jesus add to the meal? Right? When he said what he just said, what Jace just read there, he says, take and eat that this is my body, take and drink, this is my blood. What was he doing differently that they had never done before with the Passover? What was being added, guys? Shalom?
His body and blood.
Yeah, he was being added. Jot that down. Jesus was adding himself to the Passover meal. And he wasn't just adding a side element to saying, here, I'm going to add this a little bit. He says, I am the Lamb, right? Do you guys remember what John the Baptist said when he first saw Jesus walking along the shore of the Jordan? He said, behold the Lamb of God. He was already prophetically kind of proclaiming that Jesus is going to be not only the last sacrifice, but really the only needed sacrifice. You see, every lamb up until now that was sacrificed on the altar in the Holy of Holies, that was sacrificed on the altar in the tabernacle as they were wandering through the desert, every lamb that was sacrificed for the sins of the people, the Day of Atonement they called it, was always pointing forward in time to one day there will be the perfect sacrifice, right? Now, the Jews, or the Hebrews even further back, they didn't really understand that's what the Messiah was going to do. What did they think the Messiah was going to be? An earthly king. They thought he was going to be a powerful, militaristic takeover and let the Hebrews or the promised land kind of be the place, right? And so when Jesus shows up as the son of a carpenter and pretty humble and meek and not powerful and so forth, they're like, this isn't him, right? And that's why the Pharisees, push back so hard at the Sadducees, teachers of the law. All right, so what does that tell you about what he came to do? If he says that I am the Lamb of God, what does it say?
He's sacrificing himself.
He is sacrificing himself. Jot that down, right? He is sacrificing himself. Or if you want to just say simply, he came to die. If I am the Lamb, right, and this is the Passover, I'm here to die. This was probably not something that the disciples understood that Thursday night at the Last Supper. But afterwards, I imagine they went, that's what he was talking about, that he was going to die. Because if you guys know the account, we're not going to read all the way through it tonight. But there is that time where, we are going to get to the part about Peter arguing with him about this. Next question here, it says, how do Christians still practice this today? How do we still practice it? We take communion. Yep. We take communion. And what gift does God give us at the sacrament of the altar? What does he give us? I often talk about it. That's what he gives us, but what do we receive as a result of his body and blood? You're right, we do get it. That's right. Yes. What's the blessing? Yeah, bingo. Forgiveness. Grace. Right? Okay? Perfect. All right, at the end of the meal, Jesus had an interaction with Peter, verse 31 through 34. Let's see. Landry, would you read that for us? 31 through 34. Same chapter.
Also, when you see these,
Nope. Should be Simon. 22, 31. That a girl.
Simon, behold, Satan demanded to you that he may sift like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and you have turned in. Strengthen your brothers. Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny me 3 times that you know me.
There you go. Beautiful. All right, so do you think that you would have said what Peter said here? Do you guys think you would have said this? Look at what he says. I want you to see that again, right? He says this to Jesus. He said, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Do you guys think you would say that to Jesus? I don't know. I mean, I think most of us would say, I don't think I would be willing to go to prison. But if you really believe that he was Jesus and the Messiah, you might. I'm not telling you there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's just honest to be able to say, I think we would struggle with it. Right? I don't think I would just simply go, well, Lord, been good knowing you. Right? I'm sorry that you're going to go die and so forth. I think you'd sit there and go, I don't want you to leave. Right? I don't want this to be over. I like having you around. Right? Everything you say is meaningful and it's important and you love people and that's good to be around. And there's kind of this great big swell that happens around you. You know, people are popular and they like being around you and so forth. And maybe you are going to get rid of Rome. Who knows? And so there's this issue of, well, what do we do if you're going to be gone? And I think that's the real question. So, all right. So that's number 2. You've circled that already on the map. Let's go to number 3, back to page 99. Got a guy that's praying up to the sky. That's obviously Jesus in Gethsemane. After the meal, so this is after the Lord's Supper. So we have him entering in on Palm Sunday, number 1, right, at the gate of the city, riding into the city. Number 2, with the Passover today. If we wanted to still celebrate the Passover, it's just celebrating what God rescued the Hebrews long ago, which, guys, are kind of our ancestors, right? Even though you may not be Jewish, that's not what I'm talking about ethnically, right? I'm talking about spiritually, right? The reason you are a believer today is because of those Hebrews. There wasn't another branch of people that followed Yahweh differently than them, right? They kind of began the movement of Christianity, the Jews, and so forth. After the meal, Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives to pray. Luke 22, 39 through 53. I'm not going to go into that tonight. We're going to be running a little bit shy on time. But who do you suppose, when Jesus says these words, and let me just pull these out, when Jesus says in the verse 42, can everybody look there, please? Chapter 22, verse 42. Jesus says these words. I think this is ESV. Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Now, this is not in the upper room for communion, right? He's not at the Lord's Supper, his supper, holding a cup of wine. He's in the garden. He's praying, right? And so he says, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me. What is the cup, do you think? Anna Joe? His burden. That's a good word. Yeah. Write that down, guys. His burden. Can you think of another word? That's a good one. I like that. What else? Jesus is saying, Father, take this away from me. That's another good word. Yeah, the burden, the responsibility, the plan of the Father. Because he's actually asking his Father, it's like, hey, if there's a different plan, right, I'll take it. But I don't want this to happen. This is one of those times, there's so many with Jesus. This is one of those times where he knows what's coming. Now, I'll tell you, this is a little bit deep tonight too. He is not just stressing, and that's an understatement, stressing over the physical pain that is to come. Right? There's more to it than that. Because what's going to happen, he says this from the cross. He uses those words that are in Aramaic. Have you guys ever heard those? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. You guys ever heard those before? You might pronounce them differently. But what do they mean? Do you remember? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, help me out. Bingo, yeah. Why have you forsaken me? Which means you have left me. Now, the reason I think that is some of the saddest words ever out of Jesus, because what do we know about the Trinity? Who is the Trinity, first of all? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? Are they three different gods or the same God? Three persons, one God, right? That's their identities, but they're one God, and so forth. Now, are they eternal? Yes, they are eternal, which means they haven't had a beginning, they don't have an end. And yet Jesus is going to have to die. And so what's happening to Jesus? He is being, in a sense, removed from the Trinity. Not forever, but for a moment where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's a ripping apart of the Trinity. And I believe that's what Jesus is truly suffering. He's not uncaring about the physical pain that's coming. But I think the biggest thing is something that you and I can't comprehend is somehow his Father is gonna have to leave him alone. Imagine you guys going to a mall at Christmas time when you were like 4 years old, and your parents take you out in the middle of the mall where it's really busy and there's lots of people, and then leave you there and run away. Could you imagine the fear? In your, it's not quite the same. But Jesus is on the cross and he's like, Dad, you've left me, right? That connection that I've had forever is gone, right? And that's what hell was, right? Hell is actually the absence of God, right? All right. So, number 4. So, circle number 3. You guys see where Gethsemane is outside of town? Right? If you look at where Jesus entered into town, Gethsemane is just outside on the other side of the road that comes in. Okay? Number 4, go back to page 98. Peter denies Jesus and Judas hangs himself. That's a real positive headline. We're going to skip the reading because I think you guys are probably familiar with this. Peter denied he knew Jesus because he feared losing his life. By the way, how many times did Peter get asked if he knew Jesus? 3 times. What did Jesus tell him was going to happen that night? Jason? You're going to deny that you know me 3 times. Now, you understand in the upper room, Peter's feeling pretty good. Okay? It's like you sitting around the Thanksgiving table. That's not a very stressful place. You're like, I feel pretty good here. Family's around. There's good food. I'm relaxing at the table. And Jesus says, tonight one of you are going to betray me. Now he was talking about who? Not Peter. Betray me was different. Judas. He was talking about Judas. And then so Peter jumps up and goes, well, who is it? Right? And he's like, it's somebody who's here participating with this meal. And he's like, well, it's not going to be me, Lord. No way is it going to be me. And Jesus goes, actually, Peter, tonight you're going to deny knowing me 3 times. He's like, it's never going to happen. And sure enough, after he's arrested. Now, in Peter's defense, he's terrified. Right? Soldiers came in, took Jesus, hauled him away. Do you guys remember the one part of the story? It's in Mark, where Peter whips out a sword in the garden. What's he do with the sword? Cuts off a guy's ear, right? I don't know if Peter's just a lousy aim. He's a fisherman, so I don't know what kind of swordsman you are. But if you're going to do something to hurt somebody, cutting off an ear, isn't it? Right? I don't know. I just think he's flailing wildly, and just happens to catch the guy's ear. And then Jesus heals him and everything's fine and so forth. But anyhow. So, how do you think Peter felt after Jesus' prophecy came true? Once that rooster crowed, because Jesus said, you'll deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. When that rooster crowed, what do you think he felt?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassed. That's a good word. Jot that down. Embarrassed. Anything deeper? Regretful. Yeah. Deeply regretful. Because it says he went out and he wept bitterly. Okay? And then it says Judas, underneath that, Judas, the disciple who had betrayed Jesus to the authorities, committed suicide. Okay? So, Peter goes out and cries. Judas kills himself. Takes his life. There's a different response there. Okay? Both of them, in a sense, denied Jesus, right? Peter said, I don't know him. Judas actually set up somebody to come and arrest him and kill him. Why do you think his reaction was different from Peter's? Why do you guys think?
Maybe he felt like his was worse than Peter's.
I think you're right. Yeah, that his response was worse than Peter's. His actions were worse. And, guys, if Satan was in influence of Judas, right? I think this is one of those things that this is what Satan would want to do, right? Not only use Judas to cause the arrest and ultimately the death of Jesus, as it were. All right, number 5. Jesus before the council. Jesus was held in a sort of prison at the high priest's house all night while they mocked him and beat him. Sometime the next morning, that's on Friday, we call it Good Friday, after the leaders had already decided to sentence Jesus, they brought him out. Now, what did they accuse Jesus of? We read this in another account, but what did they want to accuse him of? Shiloh?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy, which is what?
Saying you're fake God.
Yeah, it's actually saying that you are God. Yeah, blasphemy is saying you're God. So jot that down. Blasphemy. If you need help spelling it, it's B-L-A-S-P-H-E-M-Y. Blasphemy. Right? Claiming to be God. Right? And number 6, Jesus before Pontius Pilate, when he goes before Pilate, we actually use these words when we use the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and even the Athanasian Creed, which we only use once a year. It says, though the Jewish council sentenced Jesus to die, they didn't have the authority to do this. Why not? Who's in charge?
They weren't part of the government.
Exactly, right? Rome was smart in this. When they captured someone, they let them kind of do their own thing within certain bounds because it meant they didn't have to govern everything. They'd say, hey, you can go downstairs and play. They're not actually going, what are you doing? And what are you doing now? And how are you doing it? You're like, you can go down there and play. That's our control. Just want you to be there. It sounds safe. I think you're okay. But I'm not going to have to go down there and watch over. It's like, why are you playing checkers? Why are you playing that board game? Why are you playing video games? What game are you playing? What are you going to do now? They don't micromanage it. They kind of stand back and roll it that way. But when it comes down to sentencing someone to death, they said the Jewish officials can't do that. Can't just be killing people or issuing death sentences, not killing people, but issuing death sentences to anybody that they didn't agree with. So the Roman governor had to get involved. His name was Pilate. He was the only one who had the authority in Jerusalem. So what did Pilate do to avoid sentencing Jesus to death? Well, the one thing he did, jot this down. You have an answer, Bodie? What is it?
He let the people decide.
He let the people decide. Now, the reason that that's important because he's a politician, right? I find this disturbing, to be honest. A lot of times when a political person is running for office, they tend to want to support the things that the people around them like, right? Like for you guys, if I were your teacher and we were all in the same class together, and I'd say, what do you guys think about having Friday off of school? I imagine most of you go, that sounds like an excellent idea. Now, if you were all for that, and I would say, as your teacher, I am going to declare that Friday is going to be a day off of school. And you'd go, yay, we love our teacher, because I'm doing what you want me to do. Instead of kind of going, I think this is what would be best. He talked with Jesus. He investigated. He found out there's nothing worth killing him over. And he went to the people and said it. I haven't found anything worth the death penalty. And they're like, you're no friend of Caesar, right? They're kind of hit him politically and say, you're not a friend of your political party. We're going to cause problems. You better do this. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to turn him over to you, and then we're going to crucify him then. I mean, he didn't really care about Jesus. He's not a believer and so forth. And plus, Jesus was a Jew. Pontius Pilate's a Roman. I don't really care a whole lot of love for the Jews, but he was also a coward. All right? So he finally gave in because the people said so. All right, turn over to page 100, and I'll give you guys your assignment, a little short assignment here to wrap it up. This is for you guys at home that are watching it on the video as well. In that blue column, it says this: God has redeemed me to be his own, which means he has purchased me. Right? In today's readings, and we read through most of them ourselves. You might have to read through some on your own. We see that Jesus endured so much in the last week of his life. I want you to again, like last week, I want you to write 5 things. Right? So write that down, 5 things in the space below. Different things Jesus had to endure on his way to the cross. So not including the cross, but 5 things he had to endure on the way to the cross. So you can't take it all the way to Good Friday's crucifixion, but everything before that. Give me 5 things Jesus had to endure. And you could talk about emotions. You could talk about betrayal. You could talk about court cases. There's lots of things that I think if you could kind of think of yourself as, if we could put ourselves in Jesus' mind, there were lots of things he had to endure before the cross. Everybody clear on that? Got it? I think endure seems to embody negative. Yeah, I don't think I endure a birthday party unless it's a really lousy birthday party, right? I don't think I'm like, here's $1 million. I'll endure it, right? Okay, guys, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much. We have 6 weeks left, and then we're all done.